My kids moved out years ago, and ever since cancer took her, it's just been me and Rex. One night, after a long day in the shop, I decided to go for a walk. My property is pretty big, so just a single loop is usually enough. The air was cool, and Rex trotted beside me. I've walked that loop hundreds of times, but as I was heading back toward the house, something caught my eye. I glanced up at the second-story window, the one that looked out from the bedroom Maria and I used to share. For a split second, I thought I saw something move. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring up at that window. No one should have been in there. I hadn't stepped foot in that room in years, couldn't bring myself to. My blood boiled at the thought of someone breaking into my house. I wasn't going to stand for that. I rushed inside, heart racing, and ran up the stairs. The room was empty, just like I had left it. No sign of anything out of place. I checked every possible hiding spot, but I found nothing. I felt foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. The next night, I woke up to Rex growling. He's a good dog, only barks when there's something to bark at. I sat up in bed, listening. That's when I heard it, creaking from upstairs. Maybe just the house settling, but in my gut, I knew better. The footsteps were coming from right above me. Directly above my room was the bedroom. I debated grabbing my hunting rifle from downstairs but didn't want to go that far. If it came down to it, I was confident I could handle whoever was up there. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check. Again, nothing. The room was untouched. At this point, my anger was turning into anxiety. Something felt off. The following night, I came downstairs and found the kitchen lights on. I knew for a fact I had turned them off before bed. I don't leave lights on, never have. There was no question anymore. Someone was in my house. Panic set in. I called the police and told them I thought someone had been sneaking around. They searched the house from top to bottom but found nothing. They were polite but clearly didn't believe me. But I knew what I had seen. That night was the worst by far. I couldn't sleep, so I went back upstairs to check the bedroom again. I don't know why, maybe I thought it would ease my mind. But the moment I opened the door, I froze. Maria's clothes were scattered all over the floor. I had packed them away after she died. Now, they were everywhere. Before I could make sense of it, I saw her. A woman stood in the doorway, staring at me. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I knew one thing, she wasn't Maria. She was too short. Whoever she was, she didn't belong there. I had never been so afraid in my life. Without thinking, I ran at her. She turned and bolted down the stairs and out the front door. By the time I got outside, she was gone. Rex and I searched the property, but there was no trace of her. I didn't sleep that night. For months, I barely slept at all. Every little noise set me off. I kept my rifle next to my bed, ready for anything. I even considered asking Henry, my brother's old friend who helps around the house, to stay with me, but I wasn't raised to rely on others. Then, one night, I saw her again. I was sitting in the living room when I noticed a figure standing in the yard, staring at me through the window. It was her. My heart nearly stopped. I grabbed my rifle and ran outside, Rex close behind. She was still there, just a dark silhouette in the moonlight. I fired a few warning shots into the air. She turned and ran into the darkness. I stood outside for a long time, waiting to see if she would return. She never did. I haven't seen her since. But I know it's only a matter of time. I don't think I can live in this kind of fear forever. But thank God for Rex. I have no idea what I would do without him. I work for a catering company, which means I'm often on the road late at night. The hours aren't great, and the work is exhausting, but it pays the bills. By the time I get home, I'm either too wired from caffeine to sleep or I knock out the second I hit the bed. One night, around 2 a.m., I was driving back home after a long shift. My stomach was growling, I hadn't eaten in hours. There's a fast food place right off the highway about 10 minutes from my house, my go-to for late-night snacks. It's open 24/7, and sometimes, a small order of fries is the perfect way to wind down. When I pulled into the drive-thru, I noticed a few cars ahead of me, which was a bit surprising for that hour. As I sat there waiting, my eyes wandered around the parking lot. That's when I noticed it, a beat-up old car with dark-tinted windows parked in the farthest corner. The restaurant had locked its doors for the night, only serving drive-thru customers, so there was no reason for anyone to be parked there. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just someone eating in their car, which I had done plenty of times myself. After grabbing my food, I pulled out of the lot and started thinking about where to eat. I wasn't ready to go straight home, but I also didn't want to sit idling in my car. A place immediately came to mind, a scenic overlook on a nearby hill. It's part of a large nature reserve, with a winding road leading up to a breathtaking nighttime view of the city. I used to go there with friends in high school all the time. It was our usual spot to relax, talk, or just enjoy the quiet. I figured a little nostalgia wouldn't hurt. When I arrived at the small gravel parking area outside the reserve, it was completely empty, which wasn't unusual given the time. Before I could even turn off my engine, another car pulled in. My stomach sank when I recognized it. It was the same old car from the fast food parking lot. I felt uneasy. Had they followed me? The car parked a short distance away, and its engine cut off. No music, no movement, nothing. I tried to shake off my paranoia. Maybe they were here for the same reason I was. After all, it was a well-known spot. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Not wanting to be alone anymore, I called one of my friends, Sebastian, who lived nearby. I figured if he wasn't awake, I'd just eat my food and leave. Surprisingly, he answered. He had been up working on a paper. I convinced him to swing by and hang out for a bit, and he said he'd be there in 10 minutes. As I waited, I kept glancing at the other car. Still no movement. I told myself I was just being paranoid. When Sebastian finally pulled in, I felt immediate relief. We got out of our cars and started walking up the path to the overlook. Just before the parking lot disappeared from view, I looked back. The car doors had opened, all four of them at once. Four men stepped out. They just stood there for a few seconds, looking at each other in silence. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I nudged Sebastian, who followed my gaze. Before they could notice us, we kept walking up the trail, letting the trees block our view of the parking lot. Alarm bells were going off in my head, but Sebastian seemed unfazed. "They're probably just here to smoke or something," he said. We reached the top, and for a moment, I let my guard down. The view was just as beautiful as I remembered, the city lights stretching endlessly into the distance. We sat on a low stone wall and started eating, chatting like we used to. But that peace didn't last. Laughter and voices carried through the trees, growing closer. We turned around and saw three men approaching us, one of them holding a cigarette or maybe a joint. They were laughing and seemed friendly enough at first, but instead of finding their own spot, they walked straight toward us. The man with the cigarette had tattoos up his arms and a piercing in his nose. He gave a half smile and offered us a hit. We declined. One of his friends chuckled and called us wimps, to which Sebastian scoffed. That's when I blurted out something I probably shouldn't have. "Weren't you guys just at that fast food place?" The guy with the cigarette stopped smiling. His two friends did the same, their expressions turning cold. They didn't say anything for several long, tense seconds. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Then, finally, the leader spoke. He claimed he had just gotten off work and came here every night to unwind. To prove it, he lifted his hoodie, revealing a uniform from that same fast food chain. It made sense, but something still felt wrong. That's when I realized something chilling. There had been 4 guys in that car, but only 3 had approached us. I felt Sebastian tense up beside me. He had noticed too. As if on cue, he suddenly turned his head toward the tree line. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. The 4th guy was hiding in the shadows, watching us. And he was holding something. I didn't wait to find out what it was. "Run," I whispered. We bolted. Footsteps thundered behind us. I didn't dare look back. My only focus was making it down the trail as fast as possible. The moment we hit the gravel lot, we sprinted to our cars, yanked the doors open, and floored it out of there. In my rearview mirror, I saw them rushing back to their car. I didn't drive straight home. I was afraid they might follow me. Instead, I met up with Sebastian a few blocks from his house. We sat in our cars, catching our breath, still in shock. Neither of us could wrap our heads around what had just happened. That's when Sebastian showed me his phone. He had managed to snap a picture of them while we were talking. He sent it to me, but we weren't sure what to do with it. After thinking it over, we decided to go back to the fast food place the next day to report what had happened. The next afternoon, we found a young employee who seemed approachable. We showed him the picture and explained everything. His face went pale. Apparently, the guy who had claimed to work nights really had worked there, but had been fired months ago. His ex-girlfriend had also worked there, and after she dumped him, he started stalking and harassing her, both at work and outside of it. The police had even gotten involved, issuing a restraining order against him. But clearly, he hadn't been following that order. Sebastian and I were horrified. I had no idea why he had fixated on me that night, but it was clear the guy was unhinged. It's been a week, and I haven't gone back to that fast food place, or the Overlook. I don't know what those guys were planning, but I have a bad feeling it wasn't just to scare us. I just hope the police catch him before he recognizes my car somewhere. I grew up in a small town where nothing much ever happened. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and you could walk home at night without worry. But like all small towns, we had our fair share of ghost stories, especially about the old church on the edge of town. It had been abandoned for decades, standing alone at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown trees. No one knew exactly why it was shut down, but rumors swirled about strange occurrences, voices echoing inside, and lights flickering in the windows despite the building having no electricity. As kids, we dared each other to step inside, but most of us never had the guts. As I got older, I put those stories behind me, until one night changed everything. It was a chilly fall evening when my friends, Eric and Jordan, suggested we check out the church. We were bored, and the idea of sneaking into a supposedly haunted building seemed thrilling. I wasn't exactly eager, but I didn't want to be the only one backing out. Armed with a few flashlights and our phones, we drove out there just before midnight. The road was rough, the trees pressing in on both sides. When we reached the church, its towering silhouette stood against the night sky, its wooden frame worn by time. The front doors were still locked, but Jordan found a broken window on the side. We squeezed through, one by one, landing in what must have once been a storage room. The air inside was thick, stale, carrying the scent of rot and old wood. Our flashlights swept over dusty pews, a cracked altar, and stained glass windows now clouded with dirt. It was eerily quiet, except for the faint creaking of the floor beneath our steps. Eric, always the brave one, walked ahead, shining his light into every corner. "See? It's just an old church. No ghosts, no demons," he scoffed. Just as he said that, something clattered in the distance. We froze. It had come from the far end of the church, near a set of closed doors leading to what we assumed was the basement. Jordan laughed nervously. "Probably just a rat." Eric, trying to act tough, marched toward the doors. Only one way to find out. He reached for the handle, but before he could turn it, a loud bang echoed through the building, like something had slammed against the doors from the other side. I felt my stomach drop. "Okay. I think we've seen enough," I muttered, backing away. But Eric wasn't ready to leave. "It's just the wind," he insisted, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. Then came another sound, faint but unmistakable. A whisper. It was low, almost like a breath against my ear, but the words weren't clear. My flashlight flickered, and Jordan let out a sharp gasp. "I swear I just saw something move," he whispered. I turned in the direction he was pointing, toward the old pulpit. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. And then, we all heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the darkness behind the altar. That was enough for me. I grabbed Jordan's arm and turned toward the window we had entered through. Eric hesitated for a second longer, staring at the doors as if expecting them to burst open. Then, without another word, he bolted after us. We scrambled out, nearly tripping over ourselves in our rush to reach the car. As we sped away, none of us spoke. It wasn't until we got back to town that Eric finally broke the silence. "I don't know what that was, but it wasn't the wind." Jordan nodded, still shaken. "And I swear. I saw someone standing behind that altar." We never went back to that church. And as far as I know, no one else has dared to enter since. But sometimes, when I drive past that dirt road at night, I can't help but glance toward the trees. And every now and then, I think I see a light flicker in one of the windows.